Hello, YouTube. Alexander Bushkov is a popular but very secluded Russian writer. He keeps to himself mostly. He published a number of books, and quite successfully. But my interest lies in something else. He published a book about 20 years ago titled The NKVD, The War with the Unknown in the translation. NKVD, that's how the KGB, Soviet secret police, was known at the time. When this story took place, it tells about events inexplicable from the point of view of militant materialism. That's the communist ideology lexicon. Recorded by the author from the words of former employees of the Soviet Special Services. Yes, Soviet security officers, KGB, NKVD, and so forth, have repeatedly encountered paranormal phenomena in their practice. And they used to perform feats that Scully and Fox Mulder of the X-Files, even Kolchak from the old American TV series, could envy. But they were, and still, whoever survives till now, are bound by the law of silence. Alexander Bushkov, who for 30 years had been collecting materials related to the devilry and the paranormal during the Second World War and during the secret special operations of the NKVD, meaning what was taking place then, he managed to circumvent this law of silence. He got them to talk. And if the book was available in English and other foreign languages, it would be a bestseller. By the way, I knew one such NKVD wolfhound in 1997, but in another country. And he was quite tough, even in his age, roughly about 80 years old, and had stories to tell. But before I briefly retell this story that Bushkov put down, here's why I'm very much interested in this episode. It took place in the far east of the USSR. Arseniev, the famous explorer I mentioned and have told you of his strange encounters in my other videos, and soon I will tell you more about them because my research is continuous. Well, Arseniev was mentioned, and back in the late 1980s, when Bushkov was still interviewing the former KGB people about their supernatural experiences, I compiled local legends and reports pertaining to the Far East, the maritime province, of the indigenous people, macabre, eerie, paranormal to us. Some are in my books and some I will go over in my future videos. Well, Bushkov's interlocutor, his name abbreviated as FOV, would not talk about the nature of the task they performed at the time. He and his team, they met with the right people at the agreed location and were returning with the package to the place where the SO, KO, and GO and KVD operatives remained with their horses. FOV was accompanied by two operatives, KN and L. The latter was Korean by ethnicity and a local native. As they approached the winter quarters, the operatives noticed a strange silence in its surroundings. FOV still did not understand what the strangeness was, even at the time when he was telling his account to Russian author Bushkov. But the silence somehow left a lasting impression of physically palpable, oppressive anxiety. Having reason to suspect an attack on the winter quarters by a bandit group that crossed the border, FOV ordered to prepare personal weapons and secretly advance to the winter quarters from 3 directions, according to the number of the NKVD operatives in his team. Having approached a sufficient distance for visual observation, they discovered that all 6 horses were missing from the hitching post. There were only fragments of reins on the log. While operatives K, N, and L were coming in from the flanks to open crossfire if necessary, FOV found 2 human skeletons at a distance of 3 to 4 meters from the winter quarters, almost hidden by moving masses that had the structure of granular caviar or a bunch of berries. As FOV approached, these masses began to actively move, deforming so that they no longer resembled piles of small rounded objects, but rather flat oblong panels, which, taking advantage of his confusion, disappeared between the trees at a speed approximately exceeding the speed of a running person, but inferior to the speed of a cyclist. At the same time, there were soft sounds that resembled dry rustling or swooshing, presumably caused by the movement of masses over the layer of caked needles. The automatic burst FOV fired at one of the objects had no visible effect on the latter, although the operative visually noted several hits. Most of all, the objects looked like a cluster of insects like ants or locusts, but this concerns only the purely external similarity of the entire mass. These masses, which had an area of approximately 1 square meter each when moving, did not consist of insects, but of something like beads of somewhat irregular shape, spherical rather than oblong. The color was dark red, much darker than last year's needles. For some time, a pungent, non-associative odor was felt in the vicinity of the passage of these masses, which did not resemble the smell of any chemicals or gases known to FOV. As the leader of the group, FOV considered the pursuit inappropriate, given the mystery of the objects, the speed of their movement, and the completely unknown degree of danger that could emanate from them. After examining the scene, his team soon found out that the skeletons most likely belonged to comrades ZO, KOV, and GOV. The third skeleton was found inside the winter quarters, which was determined by watches, cigarette cases, personal weapons, and various small items, of which only those that were preserved, as it is now clear to FOV, artificial origin, vulcanite, metals, celluloid, glass, etc. Materials of natural origin, clothing, leather boots, and belts, etc., disappeared without a trace. In addition, the lower left limb of one of the skeletons had traces of an overgrown compound fracture, which indicated that it belonged to the operative who, as FOV knew, had suffered just such a fracture 4 years ago. Oblique, closed with crushing at the fracture site. The skeletons looked completely stripped of muscle tissue and tendons, and there was no blood around. Judging by the absence of carbon deposits in the barrels of personal weapons, the absence of spent shell casings, as well as the position of the weapon that remains, the operatives were caught completely unexpectedly. There is no doubt that these strange masses killed them. Otherwise, a chain of the most incredible coincidences would have to be allowed as an explanation. Fragments of reins indicate that the horses fled into the taiga. This is also confirmed by the fact that the NKVD team did not find a single horse bone in the vicinity. Giving free rein to his own speculation, FOV could assume that the sudden flight of the horses was not associated with any increased danger for their unfortunate comrades, but most likely with the appearance of a large animal like a bear nearby. That is how, in their place, he would most likely regard the sudden flight of the horses. With the operative L, who also saw the masses hiding in the taiga, because approaching from the other side, he didn't notice them at all. Even before the inspection of the scene was completed, something like an epileptic seizure occurred, which he had not been previously observed to have. In very incoherent terms, he reported that these predatory creatures had been known to the local population for a long time, but were becoming rarer, so that the local population of these creatures was assumed to have completely disappeared by now. The names of the creatures in the language of the local population, as far as FOV could make out from the shouts of Comrade L, sounded like Li So or Li Gi So. Comrade L also claimed that these creatures have long been revered by local evil spirits, and encountering them leads to quick death even without direct contact. As the head of the group, FOV decided to bury the skeletons and collect their personal belongings and move on foot to the nearest settlement, which is part of the area of responsibility of the local border guard. The operative L's condition was getting worse. By the evening of the second day, he could no longer move on his feet and fell into a delusional state with complete ignorance of both the surrounding realities and his comrades. After dark, he died with symptoms of a suspected heart attack, and at dawn, having made sure that the rigor mortis had set in, Operative Ken and FOV buried the body, after which they continued to move through the taiga, where they were stopped by a mounted border patrol at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and after FOV's team informed them of the passport, were taken to the city. After a detailed report to the management, so to say, Ken and FOV were subjected to a special review of various plans in accordance with practice, which did not reveal any compromises or official omissions in their actions. They were deemed fit for further service, although they were sent for a week of sanatorium treatment with a full medical examination. According to some information that reached FOV, the management conducted an inspection at the scene with the use of a special group, but its results were not communicated to FOV and his comrade. They themselves could not ask questions about this to their superiors because this was contrary to established practice and, of course, was not encouraged. In the same month, FOV and Operative KN were sent to new duty stations. They had been provided with a corresponding non-disclosure agreement in the prescribed form that they had to sign. FOV had nothing more to show about it. He could add that the Comrade L's condition and the subsequent death were caused, as FOV now believed, by self-suggestion based on local superstitions, from which, unfortunately, he was not free. Both FOV and Comrade KN, whom he saw more than once afterwards, did not experience anything in life that could be called the intervention of mystical forces, which Comrade L raved about before his death. Reviewing the past life that he spent, FOV could confidently conclude that both he and Comrade KN lived in the most ordinary lives, without any mystical interference, with the usual dangers that beset people of their profession, both during the Great Patriotic War, World War II, and in the peacetime. FOV could not remember any bad luck streaks. He had no particular interest in what happened because the lack of information about the objects he had seen was too great, which did not allow FOV to work with hypotheses and even put them forward. Now, comments from Bushkov. The late comrade FOV, born in 1911, who reluctantly told the author of this story in 1987, but then relaxed enough to put it on paper himself, was a retired major. However, Bushkov is not sure that he carried exactly such a title, knowing the ability of the NKVD veterans to skillfully cast a shadow on a fence even on a clear day, as the saying goes. But there is no doubt that the old man had served in the relevant departments all his adult life, as is confirmed by testimony. "Yeah, damn," wrote Bushkov, mentioning that he himself seems to have contracted the official dumb language, retyping the old man's writings. Anyway, FOV was quite a wolfhound. By mindset, he was blatantly down to earth in everything that was not directly related to his former work, and was almost ignorant in everything else, especially literature and other fine arts. His literary tastes were reduced to endless rereading of Soviet espionage and wartime novels of Yulian Semyonov, Bryantsov, Bogomolov, Medvedev, memoirs of partisan guerrilla commanders and military leaders. He was not interested in fiction at all, and according to Bushkov's impressions, he was not inclined to thoughtful, sophisticated, practical jokes. It is a complete impression that in his youth he actually encountered something that exceeded his understanding. But was he the only one? And therefore caused rejection. On the other hand, Bushkov was convinced that the old man had an excellent memory and observation, so that his memories are clear in the communications protocol. Actually, he's writing, that's like the protocol. This episode actually broke out of everything he had told, which was a lot of interesting but thoroughly mundane stories about the fighting and, so to speak, the work days of the NKVD, SMERSH, Death to the Spies Wartime Agency, and the MGB, Ministry of State Security. Everything he told to Bushkov. Exactly where the case took place has remained a mystery. If we carefully analyze other details and rare omissions, this story most likely happened in the pre-war period somewhere in the far east of Primoria, Maritime Province, when the enemy was on the other side of the border in the form of Japanese and the Matsugo. It is very likely that FOV and his companions went out to meet with the Soviet intelligence agent from behind the border and received materials from him, that very package I mentioned in the beginning, the delivery of which presumably saved both NKVD operatives from the wrath of their superiors in the end. Considering that our FOV, being senior of the group, lost 4 of his subordinates out of 5, and in justification he could only talk about strange masses, they could have been executed. The morals were unpretentious then, and I'm speaking about FOV and his other comrade coming back with such a loss. And so things turned out differently. Actually, they got treated, where they kept in a mental asylum for a week, which we called sanatorium. But then they were put back in the ranks. It is quite possible, by the way, that the mysterious drama took place not on the Soviet territory, but on the adjacent territory. Otherwise, why did the NKVD operatives have to stomp through the taiga for more than 2 days before they met the border guards? Bushkov simply did not have an opinion of his own. The late FOV, a limited but intelligent grandfather at that time, quite correctly mentioned that there was not enough information to build any hypothesis. One can only recall that Arseniev, in his books about the Far East and Primoria, mentioned things no less amazing, and according to rumors that persistently circulated among Soviet writers of the older generation, he simply did not include some curiosities in the books, although they actually happened to him. And Bushkov thinks he knows why. There are situations like this. When something extraordinary happens to a person, and he knows for sure that all this was neither a dream nor a delusion, nor a hallucination, but nevertheless, what happened is so mysterious and wrong that a person repeats to himself, yes, it was, but it shouldn't be. There are such situations, honestly, said Bushkov. And I will tell you more about Arseniev and what he experienced from the available writings that, through my research, I have to present to you. If you like my research, please kindly support me through the links you'll find in the description to this channel. Please subscribe to my channel and please put notification button on and tell others about my work. Thank you.